Hi everyone, today we're going to read on Unit 2 from Sociology of Development. So, the Unit 2 name is Change, Modernization and Development. Contents are 2.1 Introduction, 2.2 Social Change, Concept, Characteristics and Causes, 2.3 Perspective of Social Change, 2.4 Modernization, Concept and Features, 2.5 Perspectives on Modernization, 2.6 Critics of Modernization Theories, 2.7 Development, Conditions and Barriers, 2.8 Observations about Recent Development Experience, 2.9 Conclusions and 2.10 Further Reading. Learning objectives. This unit will help you to analyze the various concepts of change, modernization and development, perspective of change, modernization and development, conditions and barriers of change, modernization and development, and developmental experience of India. 2.1 Introduction. In the earlier unit of this block, we have discussed development from the perspective of progress, evolutions and growth. In this unit, we shall discuss development from the perspective of change and modernization. In the earlier unit, you must have noticed that along with the process of evolution, progress and growth, we have also touched upon the change and modernization linked to the issues of development in human society. In this unit, we will specifically learn in greater detail how the process of change and modernization have been linked to the question of development. This unit begins with the discussions on the major characteristic features of social change and its causes. Sociologists and anthropologists have perceived the process of change from diverse perspectives. We have presented a glimpse of these perspectives on change here. In comparison to change, modernization is a relatively new concept. It is also a new process. Besides describing features and perspectives of modernizations, we have also presented a critique of this concept. The last section of this unit deals with the process of development, various conditions that facilitate and hinder the process of development. This unit also presents a few developmental experience. 2.2 Social Change, Concept, Characteristics and Causes. One of the central concerns of sociology of development is change. In societies of all times, there is change affecting every realm of life: social, economic, cultural, technological, demographic, ecological and so on. The social scientists have underlined social change in terms of a change in relationships, organization, culture, institution, structure and functioning of the social system. According to McLeod and Page, social change is a change in social relationship. It is a process responsive to many types of changes, to changes in man-made conditions of living, to changes in attitudes and belief of men, and to change that go beyond how human control to the biological and physical nature of things. To Lundberg, social change refers to any modification in establishment pattern of inert human relationships and standards of conduct. In a similar vein, Judson R. Randis writes, social change refers to change in the social structure and functioning of the social relationship of society. Canning feels social change refers to the modification which occur in the life patterns of life. According to M.E. John, social change is a term used to describe variations in or modifications of any aspect of social process, social patterns, social interaction and social organization. By social change, Kingsley Davis mean only such alterations that affects the organization, structure and function of society. Robert A. Nimsberg various views of social change as a succession of differences in time within a persisting identity. To John J. McEonix, social change is the transformation of culture and social institutions over time. There are few identifiable characteristics of social change. Some of them are as follows: that social change happens everywhere, but the rate of change varies from place to place. The social change is sometimes intentional but often unplanned. That social change may generate controversy, that some changes matter more than others do. For example, the invention of personal computer was more important than, say, patch dolls. Causes of social change. Social change is caused by various factors. Let us highlight in some of them, or some of these causes here. Cultural change. A large part of the change in society is caused by change in culture. Culture is a system that constantly loses and gains components. Invention, discovery, and diffusion are considered to be the main sources of cultural change. Inventions produce new products, ideas, and social patterns. It is a new combinations of a new use of existing knowledge. Inventions may be classified into material, telephone, aeroplane, and social invention, alphabet, language, government, etc. Each invention is new in form, function, and meaning and has long-term possibilities of impact. Discoveries is finding something that has never been found before or find something new in something that already exists. A discovery adds something new to the culture and becomes a factor in social change, and only when it is put to use. Diffusion is a process of spreading of ideas, cultures, and objects to other societies. It operates both within societies and between societies, involving trading, migration, and mass communication. It is needed a two-way process. Ideas and change. New ideas and modification of old ideas in a new context bring wide-scale change in the society. For example, Marx Weber established that rationalization of religious ideas brought about phenomenal change in Protestant world. Demographic change is caused by an increasing birth and decline in death and the migration of populations. Change occurs from demographic translations in society. Fourth, conflict and change. Change is also caused by tension and conflict. Structural strain, deprivation, cultural revitalization have been the major cause of conflict. Asia, again, social division based on class, caste, gender, ethnicity, estate, etc. have also been important sources of conflict in society. Fifth, social movements and change. Social movements are organized efforts of group of people to bring about a deliberate change in values, norms, institutions, cultural relationships, and traditions of the society. They also generate new identities and new perspective. Reflections and actions 2.1. Social change is caused by so many broad social processes like urbanization, industrialization, modernization, westernization, globalization, spread of education and literacy, enactment of new laws, penetration of mass media and communication networks, and so on. Many of these processes are interrelated. Select any one of these social processes and try to explain its impact on change in your society. 2.3 Perspective of social change. In the previous unit, we have discussed the perspectiveness on development in greater detail. Change represents a broad canvas or contour for development, progress, transformation, growth, modernization, and so on. We have specifically explained these processes in the previous unit. Let us now examine briefly how these perspectives have been used to explain change. 1. Evolutionary perspective. In the second half of the 19th century, the concept of evolution assumed a central place in explanation of all forms of human development in both the social and biological science. For example, Morgan's three epochs of humanity, that is savagery, barbarism, and civilization, and Auguste Comte's ideas of human intellect. Comte argued human intellect passes through three historical phases of sophistication: theological, the metaphysical, and positive. The Spencer's view is that of the human society is passing through a course of natural development from the relatively simple patterns of organization to more complex structures characterized by increasing specialization of parts. The second, the conflict perspective. The conflict perspective can best be understood in terms of tensions and conflict between groups and individuals, and here the change is viewed as an intrinsic process in society. To Karl Marx, social change takes place based on the antagonistic class relations based on ownership on the means of production between the haves and have-nots, and that this class struggle culminates into a revolutionary change in society with its progression from ancient to feudal, and finally from feudal to capitalistic stage of development in society. According to Coser, conflict is an inevitable part of socialization process, and no social group can be completely harmonious, and as individuals have predisposition for love as well as hate. Thus, conflicts act as a creative force that stimulates change in society, constructive or destructive. While Karl Marx has identified class and class conflicts based on unequal distribution of material resources, Dahrendorf has identified the same terms of unequal distributions of authority. According to Dahrendorf, all groups in society are divided into those who have authority and those who do not have, and have conflict arises because of unequal distribution of authority in society. This conflict on unequal distribution of authority leads to change in society. Third, the structural functional perspective. To structural functional theorist, society consists of interrelated parts that work together for the purpose of maintaining internal balance. It perceives roles as locating individuals in social positions and providing them with articulated sets of expectations specifying the rights and duties of occupants. This perspective is oriented towards order and stability and preservation of the status quo. Let us examine how various scholars have perceived change in this perspective. Durkheim has observed change in terms of change in the nature of division of labor in society. He believed that the change in labor from traditional society to modern society was the cause of social change. According to Talcott Parson, society is a system surrounded by three other systems: personality, the organism, and culture. There is social equilibrium when the bodies of three systems are maintained and social changes result from boundary breaking. Hobsbawm's theory reasons that societies operate as homogeneous mechanisms and that change that upset the equilibrium in one part tend to produce compensating changes to restore that equilibrium. To him, all aspects of culture, that is material or non-material, do not change at an equal rate. This creates the phenomenon of cultural lag that ultimately leads to change in society. 4. Social psychological perspective. These theories posit that activities of people constitute the essence of change in society, and modification in the behavior can facilitate change and play an essential role in social development. Max Weber thought that modernity was replacing traditional views with a rational way of thinking. In pre-industrial societies, traditional views obstructed change. Things were the way they were because that is what everyone believed and no one questioned it. In modern societies, things were questioned and answers were calculated. According to Everett H. Hagen, traditional societies are characterized by fixed status levels and the personalities of the members are authoritarian, uncreative and non-conventional, non-innovational. On the contrary, in modern society, the predominant personality type is innovational, characterized by attributes such as creativity, curiosity, and openness to experience. Change takes place when members experience what he terms withdrawal of status respect. This is nothing but disregard for one's role in society or for one's belief and aspirations. David McClelland focused his study on what he called need for achievement, symbolized by N achievement. According to him, the greater the development of N factor, that greater the economic development in any society. Consequently, there are certain behavior characteristics exhibited by peoples with this N factor, such as individualism, energetic innovative activity, drive for success, and so on. In simple words, individual economic achievement produces economic growth. Reflections and Action 2.2. What do we sociologically mean by change? Compare and contrast between the evolutionary and structural functionalist views on social change. 2.4 Modernization, Concept and Features. Modernization is a conceptual framework that articulated a common set of assumptions about the nature of developed societies and their ability to transform a world perceived as both materially and culturally deficient. Especially Specifically, modernization theories posited a sharp distinction between traditional, read poor, and modern, read Western societies. They took for granted that economic development from traditional to modern proceeded along a single, straight, unambiguous line. Modernization advocates expected that contact with vital modern societies would accelerate progress in stagnant traditional societies. A. Concept of modernization. According to scholars, the process of modernization sums up the changes that combine to convert agriculture or underdeveloped society with a weak state into an industrialized society with a relatively efficient, active government. The modernization process embraces changes that leads up to this industrialization and urbanization. According to Wilbert Moore, modernization is a total transformation of a traditional or pre-modern society into the types of technology and associated social organization that characterizes the advanced, economically prosperous and relatively stable nations of the Western world. Similarly, Daniel Lerner defined modernization as the process of social change in which development is the economic component. In this major work, The Passing of Traditional Society, 1958, Daniel Lerner examined the process of modernization in several Middle East countries, carried out a sample survey in other underdeveloped societies, and supplemented all this with these observations of village society. Lerner's premise is that modernization is a global process occurring in a similar manner the world over, and the role of indices of development like mass media, urbanization, increase in literacy, etc. are responsible for the emergence of the new economic order. According to Lerner, modernity is result of not merely institutional changes in society but also due to changes in the personality of people. He had illustrated this with his account of the grocer and the chef in the village of a Balgat situated in Turkey. For Lerner, one of the crucial aspects of modernization is the development of a mobile personality, which is characterized by rationality, empathy. Empathy is the capacity to see oneself in the other person's situations, and this enables people to operate efficiently in a changing world. Modernization then is characterized by the high degree of literacy, urbanized media participations, and empathy. To him, compared to the traditional individual, the modern individuals are happier, better informed, and relatively young, and the people placed in the transitional category are inclined to be disconnected and liable to extremism, especially their progress is blocked by a lack of suitable political institutions. But Lerner was aware of the fact that although the people placed in the modern category seems happier, there were difficulties in development. For example, strains may be put on the government. There are problems of social control, etc. Similarly, there are personal problems at an individual level. For example, individuals placed in the transitional category may have to adjust traditional Arab and Muslim belief to a modern setting. B. Brief features of modernization. Based on this line of thinking, the main features of modernization may be summed up as follows. It emphasizes a high degree of structural differentiation and specialization. It is based on the mode of production that has come to know as the capitalistic mode of production. It is implemented from this that the social order constituted around two important classes: capitalistic, which owns the means of production, and the working class, which sells its labor in this process. It is essentially a wage labor economy. It highlights the growth of a market economy in which both buyers and sellers are seen as individuals capable of engaging in a rational choice and operating with a framework of voluntarism. It highlights the growth of bureaucratic institutions which themselves are constituted on principle of rationality and role differentiation. It is this bureaucratic organization that are seen as being the foundation of their theory. The entire gamut of institutions that maintains and regulates social order are seen as bureaucratic. It emphasizes the growth of political system based on the principle of right as crystalline within the notion of state and mediated through a set of constitutional principles. The power of the state are absolute, and there is a democratic process based on the principle of political representation and adult franchise. This process of democratization of society has led to the existence of various interest groups within the political process who represent various combating ideologies that highlight the different ways in which the affairs of the state are to be managed. Modernization process also emphasizes the growth of individualism, wherein the individual and individual rights are seen as being at the center of all social and economic and political development. Finally, the modernization process also emphasizes the idea of social progress, and through the process of democratization, it is possible for societies to achieve higher levels of individual and social emancipation. 2.5 Perspective on modernization. From the social point of view, the process of modernization has yielded a vast amount of writing. There is no unified perspectives of modernization. We will analyze the following perspectives. A. The ideal type, the diffusionist type, the psychological, and the Marxist. The first three perspectives have dominated the American thought and received immense support and patronage all over, especially in the 19th, 15th, and 16th. The fourth approach has emerged as a challenge to the other three approaches and offer a critique of their main tenets. Similarly, the Marxist perspective has also contested the other four perspectives. The ideal type perspective, this approach has manifested itself in two major variants, namely the pattern variable perspective, historical stage perspective. The pattern variable perspective, this perspective is derived from Marx Weber's concept of ideal type, which was later systematized by Talcott Parson. According to this perspective, characteristics of development and underdevelopment must be identified, and then programs and schemes of development should be made whereby underdeveloped countries discard the patterns variables of underdevelopment and adopt those of development. Inspired by the work of Talcott Parsons, Smeltzer elucidated that the modernization process was made up of four sub-processes: the modernization of technology, leading to a change from simple traditional techniques to the application of scientific knowledge; the commercialization of agriculture, which is characteristic by the move from subsistence to commercial farming, leading to a specialization in cash crop production and the development of wage labor; industrialization, which depicts the transition from the use of human and animal power to the machine power; and urbanization, which brings about the movement from the farm and villages to the large urban centers. This process sometimes occurs simultaneously and sometimes at different times. For example, in many colonial situations, agriculture becomes commercialized without industrialization. Nevertheless, these four processes affects the social structure of traditional society in a similar ways. Firstly, as a result of this change taking place simultaneously or at a different rates, traditional societies became more structurally differentiated. For Smeltzer, a developed economy and society is characterized by highly differentiated structure, whilst an underdeveloped one is relatively lacking in differentiation. By differentiation, Smeltzer means the process by which more specialized and more autonomous social units are established. He saw this as an occurring in several different spheres of traditional society: in the economy, the family, and the political system and religious institutions. So, structural differentiation is the process by which one social role of organization differentiates into two or three more roles of organizations which function more effectively in the new historical succession. The new social units are structurally distinct from each other, but take together are functionally equivalent to the original unit. Secondly, as these differentiated units merge into large units of modern type New relationships which are not based on kinship develop. These are called the process of integration. Thirdly, Spencer shows that through such differentiation and social disturbances such as mass hysteria, outbursts of violence, religious and political movements may occur, which reflects uneven processes of change. This can lead to conflict between the old and new orders of society. In other words, it produces what Durkheim called anomie or normlessness, a state of conflicting norms in a society and a culture of discontent where people are unable to realize their aspirations and may turn to violence, crime, and other antisocial behavior or to self destructive acts such as suicide. As Weber also showed at the religious level, the process of secularization causes disenchantment, fragmentation between competing or partial worldviews, social and private worlds, because social and private worlds become meaningless and there is a sense of despair and hopelessness. One of the reactions to modernization has been the emergence of fundamentalist movement that reject modern values and react a return to traditional ones. Historical stage perspective. In this perspective, apart from identification of the gap between characteristics of development and underdevelopment, it also specifies the intermediate stages and their characteristics. This perspective is mainly associated with Rostow and his economic model developed in 1960. Walt Rostow was an economic historian who served as an advisor to the American government. His book, entitled The Stages of Economic Growth, a non-communist manifesto, was pre-capitalistic and neo-evolutionary in nature and derived from the idea of an early evolutionary theory that change and development takes place according to a set of ordered sequences. According to Rostow, the process of change are simpler and self-sustaining. Economic growth could be achieved by following a 5-stage model of growth. He suggests that all societies can be placed in one of 5 categories or stages of economic growth. The first stage, the traditional society. The essential features of this society is that output is limited because of the inaccessibility of science and technology. Values are generally fatalistic and political power is the political power is non-centralized. Large number of people are employed in agriculture, which has very low productivity because of the factor mentioned above. In such a society, family and clan grouping are emphasized in the social organization. The second stage, the preconditions for takeoff. The second stage of growth is one of the transition. A traditional society does not move directly into the process of industrialization. First, certain preliminaries needed to take place. There are clusters of new ideas favoring economic progress arising, and therefore new levels of education, entrepreneurship, and institutions capable of mobilizing capital like banks, etc. Investment increases, especially in transport, communications, and raw materials, with a general directions towards commercial expansion. But in accordance with Rostow, traditional and social structures and production techniques remain the same. There is the presence of dual society. The third stage, to take off. In this stage, finally, the old traditional order and resistance are overcome. New forces which trigger economic growth expand and dominate the society. Agriculture is commercialized. There is a growth in productivity because that is necessary if the demand emanating from expanding urban centers is to be met. New political groups representing new economic groups push the industrial economy to a new heights in Britain, Canada, and the United States. The proximate stimulus for takeoff was mainly through, not entirely, technological. The takeoff period began in Britain after 1783, in France and in United States around 1840, in Russia is around 1890, and in countries like India and China 1950. The fourth stage, the drive to maturity. In this stage, the growing economic drives to extend the modern technology is all its economic activities between 10 to 20% of gross domestic product is invested, and the economy it plays in international order. Technology it come more complex, refined, and there is a move away from heavy industry. New production is not the outcome of social necessity, but the need for maximizing profit to survive in a competitive capitalistic market. The fifth stage, the mass consumption. In this final stage, the leading economic sectors specialized in durable consumer goods and services. At this stage, economic growth makes sure that the basic needs are satisfied and more resources are allocated for social welfare and social security. The emergence of the welfare of state is an example. Durable consumers goods and services are diffused on mass media. Rostow thought of this theory as a dynamic one that does not only with economic actors but also with social decisions and policies of governments. Reflections and Actions 2.3. What do you mean by modernization? How is the ideal modernization perspective of modernization differentiate from historical stage perspective as suggested by Rostow? B. The diffusionist perspective. This approach views development as a process in which there is a diffusion of cultural elements from the development to the underdeveloped countries. The underlying assumption is that the underdeveloped countries cannot overcome their backwardness without assistance from the developed countries. There is diffusion of capital, technology, knowledge, skills, institutions, including values, and so on. These scholars perceive this aid as a sacrifice on the part of developed countries for the benefit of the backward and suffering underdeveloped countries. If still a society does not reach the level of modernity and development as projected by them, then it is blamed on the inherent weakness present in the underdeveloped backward societies like demographic factors, presence of traditional institutions, beliefs, values, etc. See the psychological perspective. This approach is mainly associated with McLuhan and Kunkel, Hagen, and others. According to McLuhan, and as mentioned earlier in this unit, a society with a high level of achievement will produce energetic entrepreneurs who in turn will produce more rapid economic development. This is because a high level of achievement among people makes them behave in ways which help them fulfill their entrepreneurial roles successfully. Therefore, the cultural factors for economic and cultural development, according to this approach, is the presence of achievement, motivation among members. This leads to planned and concentrated growth and development. The Marxian Perspective. This approach accepts the fundamentals of Marxist philosophical and sociological postulates. According to this approach, that underdevelopment of some countries and the development of others is linked to the emergence of the modern capitalist system on a global scale. So the causes of underdevelopment and the problems arising out of this are blamed on the growth of capitalism. According to this theory, the relationship between the developed capitalist countries and the underdeveloped countries is not one of the harmony and cooperation. Instead, there is a subtle and indirect subjugation of the latter under the guise of aid. It is argued that the developed world is transforming the underdeveloped societies into their neo-colonial dependencies, and the entire image of aid, assistance, support, and diffusion of skill, techniques, capital, and modernized institutions and values is false and deceptive. The aid itself is seen as a basic obstacle to overcome backwardness. Followers of this approach further state that the policies and schemes for the development pursued by the ruling class of the advanced capitalistic countries are based on a theory of development which relies in strengthening and further the interest of the proprietary property class and the rich. Therefore, it is postulated that a policy of development will only be successful if it is based on achieving the reliant on the working class. 2.6 Critics of Modernization Theories. In analyzing the assets of modernization theories, it should be understood that this school of thought emerged in the early years of the 1950s and began to disappear in 1970s when belief in it started to wane. In the light of this, it could be presupposed that the weakness of modernization theories outnumber its strengths, otherwise the theories would still be relevant today. A strengths. The main quality of modernization theory is its simplicity. The objective is already visible in the image of West, and the path to follow is laid out by the history of Western evolution. All that remains is the traditional society to recognize what is needed, from examination of other takeoffs to modernity, from their own culture to evolve. Having already achieved their goal, the modern societies can assist in the evolution of the traditional society, although in reality this is far from the truth. By reference to their own history, and so essentially modernization becomes the form of mimicking, a case of what works for them should work for us. The same concept was already covered in the term Westernization, effectively referring to the mimicking of the West. But the word modernization has far less geocentric connotations, and as a result gains much more affection from developing society who are keen to retain some sense of their own history. B. The weakness. However, the strengths of modernization theory also led to its weakness, and few of them are presented below. This straightforward approach of advancing a society by the way of itself evolving internally is through the easy to grasp and as much having stronger exterior appeal, far too basic to incorporate into the world system we see today. The very fact that there are modernized societies to look up to entails that a communication and possible to cooperation between North and South already exist, and that there are therefore links and ties already in place, not necessarily to the extent that dependency theorists would go, arguing that the South cannot grow without the serving of the North's stronghold, but nonetheless significant ties in the organization of society, which means that the target society cannot be solely regarded as the internal entity. There is little hope of evading internal factors in today's global village. To resolve this, some thinkers have developed the theory of diffusionism, already dealt with earlier, which bears many of the characteristics of modernization, but accept the diffusion of ideas, products, and workforce between both modernized and traditional societies. A culture can be changed subconsciously and indeed overnight in a ways that may not be intended or in accordance with the planned evolution. Modernization may be revolutionary in that it replaces the traditional with the modern, but it must also be considered that revolutions can take some time. They are not an instantaneous event. Another criticism put forth is that while developing countries struggling to update its social and political and economic structures to those of the developed countries, it is extremely likely that the modernized country will continue to grow at the same or possible faster rate that the developing country will find it difficult to catch up. Though global evolutionary equality is not a particular goal of modernization theory, it is surely one of the aims of development as a whole and something that is worth pursuing. If this closing of the gap cannot be easily achieved by the performance of an established theory, such as seems to be the case with modernization, then it is clearly not a comprehensive cure for the problems of development. Third, it is also argued that since the modernization theory is typically a Western phenomenon, its roots obviously must lie around capitalistic society. The developing world is to be a mirror image of the civilized and world which generally embraces capitalism. For example, it is automatically assumed by the thinkers like Rostow that this is the correct way for an underdeveloped society to develop without considering the implications of alternatives. Rostow has been criticized by many of the bases of the Teleological approach. Teleological approach is one where the purpose, which is not explicitly intended by anyone, is fulfilled, while the process of fulfillment is presented as an inevitable sequence of events. In Rostow's model, policies are the result of development and not vice versa, and this is unacceptable to many, as policies of a state should be chosen and not just merely adopted. It is felt by many scholars that the characteristic of stages identified by Rostow might overlap or spill into other stages. For example, the precondition stage things may continue in the takeoff stage and could also get carried further beyond this stage. Critics feel that the Rostow placed down all the obstacles and never discuss them. Therefore, it is felt by many that his approach is conceptually vague and empirically superficial. In the takeoff stage, it is felt that merely a shift from agriculture to the other sectors is not enough. For example, while Denmark, Canada, and France attained this shift in other countries like Russia, Sweden, Germany, etc., it did not take place to the extent conceived by Rostow. Similarly, it has also been pointed out by the experts that the Rostow failed to take into consideration other aspects like the bumps, crash landings, and nosedives crashes in his takeoff stage. Rostow also failed to consider that an economy could reach the fifth stage without going through all the stages of a particular stage. For instance, it has been pointed out that countries like Canada and Australia ended in the stages of mass consumption even before reaching the stage of maturity. This was happening in recent times with oil-rich countries also. There are limits to a particular country's growth, as there might be instances when a particular country should be regarded as a fully developed, even though it might not have reached the standards of the Western countries like the USA, because it might have exhausted all its natural resources, manpower, and capital, which set the limit of growth. With respect to the less developed countries, it is felt that Rostow did not take into account the crucial factors like unemployment, underemployment, poverty, lack of infrastructure, nature of the government, etc. Fifth most well-known reactions to the theories of modernization is that it's of its antithesis, the theory of dependency. The dependency theory takes a far more global view and postulates that the difficulties of development are not due solely to the internal working of the country or the region or in question, but have more to do with the global structures imposed by the developed onto the less developed. This is the best illustrated by Andre Gundel Frank's conceptualization of international relations as a chain of metropolish satellite relationships. Frank, of the socialist tradition, suggests that there is an unseen hierarchical structure to the world relations. The chain begins with the first metropolis, usually attributed to the USA, that has no satellites, etc., that has no strong dependencies on any other regions and countries, continues downwards. The next layer consists of still strong metropolis, but still require the USA or other well-developed Western societies in some way. Until much further down we reach the ultimate satellite, which is depend on everything above it for existence. Frank argues that these dependence links are both the key and the problem when an inability to develop arises. The sanctions imposed, often consciously by the metropolises to which the satellite is dependent, strip the freedom of the satellite society to evolve and grow, because all of their output is effectively consumed by the upper society. This theory is actually visible in reality, with the situation revolving around aid to the third world, where the interest rates and the terms are so harshly imposed that the recipient country will always be at the mercy of the donor. The Frank feels that it is the dismantling of these dependency relations that is the solution to the problem of development, notably through this is a very socialist perspective, since the release of such restrictions allows for much freer and potentially diverse global system, one which does not fit well with the traditional capitalistic characteristics. The connection this has with the modernization theory is simple. Both have equal merits, each though they are completely opposed in attributes, but the question of which is most suitable is dependent on the belief of the observer. Those brought up and embroiled in a capitalistic society and who believes in the benefits of capitalism may be more likely to prefer modernization theory. On the other hand, a neo-Marxist will almost certainly stick with the theories and dependency. Clearly, it is only the completely impartial spectator that can truly judge the pros and cons of both concepts. Finally, it has been pointed out that the modernization theory itself has produced nothing true visible yet. This is not because there has been no development in the past 50 years. There has been evolution related to both fields of thought, but the theories themselves are so indistinct and vague. Modernization theory does not paint a very precise picture of what should be happening and more particularly how it should be occurring. As a motivational aid, this theory is an excellent boost to the drive of a developing society, but it is not the solution. What is remained to be seen? Reflections and Action 2.4. Write a critique of modernization based on your understanding of the dependency theory of development. 2.7. Development, Conditions and Barriers. Now that we have covered the concept of social change, modernizations and the theories of modernization, let us move on to the last subtopic of this unit, that is development. There is no definite definition of development. It is inescapably and normative terms, which at times has meant economic growth, structure, economic change, autonomous industrialization, capitalism or socialism, self-actualization, and individual, national, regional and cultural self-reliance. Notwithstanding such variations, there has been a large agreement on the fact that human beings are at the center of development and that economic growth is a means to an end human development. Development is a function of society's capacity to organize human energies and productive resources to respond to opportunities and challenges. Scholars often trace the embrace of higher, more complex, more productive levels of social organizations through the stage of nomadic, hunting, rural, agrarian, urban, commercial, industrial and post-industrial societies, and in the process trying to examine the ways by which the new activities were introduced by pioneers, imitated, resisted, accepted, organized, institutionalized and assimilated into a culture. Organizational development takes place in a foundation of 4 levels of infrastructure: physical, social, mental and psychological. All these 4 types of resources contribute to development, of which only the most material are the inherently limited in nature. The productivity of resource increases enormously as the level of organization and input of knowledge arises. The human source is recognized as a driving force and primary determinant of development. The evolution of social institutions act as a powerful stimulus for development by increasing the frequency, intensity and efficiency of social interactions. This evolution has moved through 3 successive but overlapping stages of development: physical, vital and mental, which can be described in terms of the types of organization predominant during that stage. Box 2.1. Role of urbanization, money and internet in development. Cities still today are physical organizations where people, activities, fields of life, resources and the infrastructure are accumulated at higher levels of concentrations and interact in complex ways. The growth of population and urban population density increases the intensity of these interactions, creating the critical mass needed for the emergence of the market, and the process generates sufficient demand to spur mechanization of production. Money plays a parallel role at the social level as a medium of urbanization and multiple economic activities by several orders of magnitude. The establishment of money economy frees individuals from independence on land as an essential resource for production and frees commerce from the double coincidence needed for barter trade. Money increases the frequency and speed of transaction in virtually every field of activity by making it possible for people to convert the fruits of their labor into a common currency that can be exchanged for any products or service. Money also provided incentives for people to produce more than they can consume, releasing greater energy and creativity. It serves as a medium of conversation and storage that what each person produces and permits easy transfer over any distance, thereby overcoming limitations imposed by time and spaces and dramatically increases the efficiency of transaction. The internet plays a similar role at the mental level of information and knowledge and act as a medium to organize globalization. Today, the internet is increasing the frequency, speed, and efficiency of information exchange in every field: commercial, industrial, educational, scientific, political, religious, recreational, etc. The internet also overcomes the limits of time and space by enabling instantaneous access to information around the world. It increases enormously the number, the intricacy, and complexity of interactions made possible between individuals, organizations, facts, activities, and fields of knowledge. It is an act as an organized medium for bringing all existing social organization into a greater contact to really release the maximum energy of society and thus lead to an unprecedented level of social productivity and development. Suggested conditions for development. Surplus energy, awareness of opportunities, and aspirations of advancement are the preconditions that prepare a society for a new development initiative. This is not a linear process. The three factors interact with one another is a complex way of generating a growing pressure and groundswell of new activities. Accomplishment at the previous level helps release energy and aspirations for further accomplishment. Energy makes for greater alertness and awareness. Awareness of what others are doing evokes greater aspirations and provokes energetic responses. The process as spirals back on itself, constantly reinforcing the forward momentum. While at the same time, each new level of achievement brings a certain measure of satisfaction and security that relieve the pressure for further effort. Alternations between rising urge and rising satisfactions are one reason for the modulating rhythm of progress and stagnation that is often observed. When these three factors are present in a requisitive measure, the society is subconsciously prepared for change. Let us try to understand each of them. Energy. Excess energy is an essential condition for development. The onset and speed of physical and biological reactions depend upon seed crystals, catalysts, essential nutrients, the frequency and intensity in interactions between elements, and conductive environmental conditions. So also the onset and speed of social development depends on the seeding of new ideas in society, awareness of new opportunities, social aspiration and attitude to change, the catalytic roles of individuals, the presence of essential resources and instruments, the frequency and intensity of social interaction, social preparedness, and support for new activities. Development is an expression of new social creativity. It requires immense investment of creative energy for society to experiment with new models of activity, take the risk associated with change, break the active resistance and passive inertia of fixed habits, raise standards of functioning to higher levels, acquire new skills and build higher order organization. Moving from one level of social organization to another requires the accumulation of surplus energy, as in the conversion of matter from a liquid to a gaseous state. Development is the result of surplus energy moving vertically and being organized at a higher level, rather than merely being spent in horizontal expansion at the same level. The higher level of organization is able to utilize the energy more productively. Indomitable energy has been on an outstanding trait of great political leaders such as Napoleon, Churchill and Gandhi, and business leaders such as Andrew Carnegie, Henry Ford, and Thomas Watson of IBM. Inventor of Thomas Alva Edison was known to work for days on end without sleep in the process of developing 1,100 patentable inventions and founding the General Electric Company. Organizations that are growing rapidly share the same characteristic, which is apparent even to casual visitors to high-tech companies in Silicon Valley. Energy is highly visible in progressive urban centers around the globe, from New York and London to Hong Kong and Tokyo. It is therefore not surprising that this characteristic is found abundant in societies that have achieved high levels of development, or that is become increasingly pervasive as societies enter the takeoff phase. The importance of surplus energy is most dramatically illustrated by the two conditions under which it is unable to accumulate or express itself: war and dictatorship. War destroys infrastructures and interferes with the production and trade. It physically saps the energy and resources of a country. The threat of the war keeps those energies perpetually directed towards self-defense rather than self-development. Dictatorships, on the other hand, can spur development effort up to a point, using the threat of or pressure of coercion to the channel initiative in desired direction. But the dictatorship also blocks the free emergence of new ideas and fresh initiative, which are the seeds of social innovation. It can ensure the obedience to the authority but does not spur entrepreneurships and innovation. The end of the feudalism in Western Europe was an important contributor to the onset of the mercantile era and the founding of the great European commercial empires. The further transitions from monarchy to democracy stabilized the internal order and provided the social foundations for the institutional revolution. It stimulated innovation by encouraging the free exchange of ideas and provided incentives for greater individual effort by legally safeguarding property from arbitrary or confiscation. Be awareness. Surplus social energy collects as potential beneath the surface, accumulating until it acquires sufficient force to burst out in new activities. But the mobilization of this energy for action depends on fulfillment of a second essential condition: awareness of new development opportunities and challenges. Societies that are fully consumed by the struggle for survival have little time or inclination to direct their attention towards to observe what the other societies are accomplishing or forward to envision new possibilities. When life reaches a certain level of stable comfort, societies become increasingly interested in and aware of what is going on in the world around them. This awareness may also be thrust on a society, but the unwanted intrusion of an external influence. The influx of English manufactured goods into the pre-industrial economies of Europe and the arrival of modern armed American fleet in Tokyo Harbor in the 19th century both had the effect of awakening societies to the opportunities and challenges of development and stimulating them to respond. The increasing pace of development is directly linked to an increase in the speed and reliability of information about what is taking place in other parts of the country, region and world due to improvement in communications and transportation. The proliferations of books and newspapers following the inventions and diffusion of printing press, and the growth of international shipping following the invention of navigation aid beginning in the 15th century, the growth of railways, telegraph and telephones in 19th century, and the impact of radio, film, television, computers and satellite technology in 20th century have exponentially multiplied the dissemination of information and the general level of social awareness. Today, more than 60,000 newspapers are published around the globe, including 8,000 dailies, with a combined circulation of 500 million, as an estimated readership of 1.5 billion people. Aspiration. Society must also feel a strong aspiration or felt need for achievement at a higher level that will spur efforts to convert a perceived possibility into a material reality. Social development is an expression of social will seeking to elevate the performance of the collective. As society becomes more conscious of the external environment and its own internal potential, its aspirations and will for progress increase. The greater the knowledge of its potentials, the greater the aspiration. Failures to respond to opportunities arising out of the sense of social superiority or social inferiority are expressions of a common principle. People respond to the example of those with whom they identify socially. When there is an awareness of a developmental achievement by one belonging to the same social and cultural context, it can evoke a powerful urge for accomplishment in society. When the achievement is by one who lies outside the context, it is often ignored. Thus, the adoption of a new corpus or cultivation practices by a wealthy farmer may not lead to a similar behavior by a smaller farmer in a same community. Age, social status, class, caste, wealth, occupation, and other factors help define social identity, but this trend seems to drastically change in the contemporary period. There was a time when different societies, classes, and groups within societies differed widely in the extent to which they manifested an aspiration for development. This is no longer true. Over the past 5 decades, both awareness and of the possibility and the release of aspirations for development have been spreading rapidly from one country and level of society to another. Harlan Cleveland coined the phrase revolutions of rising expectation to describe this phenomena, which has observed in Eastern Asia in the early 1950s. Since the end of the colonization and the diffusion of democracy, these revolutions have circled the globe and ignited a clamor for education, higher levels of consumption, and opportunities for advancement among millions of people. The universal awakening of this urge for progress is another compelling reason why the speed of development is increasing so rapidly. This principle has important implications for planned development efforts. It implies that the efforts by the government to initiate development will only be successful in areas where the necessary social urge and preparedness already exist. Many well-conceived development initiatives fail to catch on or go away because the leaders try to accomplish what the population has not yet come to aspire for. In this instance, the planned initiative can only contribute to the preparing the society for readiness at some future date, but will not generate immediate result. Second, barriers to development. Consequently, there are certain barriers to development. Observation of social progress reveals 3 recurring types of obstacles to development: limited perception, outdated attitudes, and anachronistic behaviors. Let us briefly look at them, each of them. A. Perpetual walls and apparently dead ends. One of the most striking characteristics of development discernible in all periods, countries, and fields of activity has been the inability of society to envision or foresee its own future destiny. This attribute is usually accompanied by the contrary tendency to perceive opportunities and insurmountable obstacles. Innumerable times in history, humanity has come face to face with what it is believed as a dead end to progress, only to discover sooner or later a way around or through the dead end to open up a wider field of opportunities. Today, powerful perceptual barriers exist with regard to employment, technology, trade, environment, corruption, inflation, and population that present very real barriers to development the world over. Malthus, the great demographer, was not the only one to foresee imminent doom, where in fact there was enormous opportunity in 1950s. Holland's population exceeded 5 million, reaching a destiny that many believed approached the ultimate limits that this tiny landmass could support. Today, Netherlands has 15 million people, almost 3 times the population density, yet it ranks among the most prosperous nations in the world and is a major food exporter. In the mid-1960s, India suffered from 2 successive years of drought and was the verge of severe famine. An expert team sent to India by the Food and Agriculture Organizations of United Nations estimated that country's food grain production would rise only by maximum 10% on 1970. Many of our Indian scientists shared a pessimistic view. Actually, grain production rose 50% during this period and doubled within a decade to make our country self-sufficient in food grains. Had our leaders shared the view of the expert, the Green Revolution may never have been attempted. Errors in assessment of future possibilities occurs when we make projections of future performance on the basis of historical trends, even though changing circumstances have radically altered the environment. Looking forward, we often see apparently insurmountable obstacles to future progress. Looking backward, we discover community and progress. History has shown time and again that there are no dead ends, only people who are unable to see the opportunities and solutions concealed behind the immediate obstacles. B. Outmoded attitudes. The most persistent obstacle to human development are not physical barriers but outdated attitudes. 15th century China possessed a navy unparalleled in size, skills and technology, but their expeditions led only to dead ends. The people of these expeditions was to display the splendor and prowess of the Chinese emperors. They ostensibly resisted the foreign ways of life and discouraged the trade. The Chinese developed a traditional immunity to world experience. A great wall of the mind separated China from the rest of the planet for centuries, fully equipped with technology, intelligence, and national resources to become great discoverers. Their attitude doomed them to become the discovered. But with the end of the Cold War and the opening up of economics and rapid globalization in the past 2 decades forced Chinese society to have more interactions with world community and also for outsiders to have more accessibility to Chinese society. Another example would be the fact that the science of medicine developed slowly in Europe due to the reluctance of physical to share their successful remedies until the establishment of Royal Society of Physicians in the 18th century led to more open exchange of information, support for research and medical education. One of the deepest and most widespread of human prejudices has been faith in the unaided, unmediated human senses. When the telescope was invented for seeing at a distance, prudent people were reluctant to allow the first-hand evidence of their sight to be overruled by some dubious novel device. The eminent geographer Cremonini refused to waste his time looking through Galileo's contraption just to see what no one but Galileo had seen, and besides, looking through those spectacles gives me a headache. Distrust of the new was for long an obstacle to the development of science. Today, outmoded attitudes bar social advancement in every field. The expansion of world trade after 1950 has been a tremendous force for stimulating job creations and rising living standards around the world. Yet fear and resistance to expansions of trade persist among Americans and Canadians to the North American Free Trade Associations, among Europeans to closer economic and monetary union, and among people in every country to freer international trade under the World Trade Organization. Anachronism. Development is also retarded by a plethora of anachronism, which has no other reason than the momentum of past habits that refuse to die. High rates of childbirth have been traditionally practiced by the poor all over the world to compensate the high rates of infant mortality. Yet, even after the introduction of modern medical technology in developing countries drastically reduced the infant mortality rates in the 1950s, rates of childbirth remained the higher levels and have taken decades to decline to a degree commensurate with the improved infant survival rates. Traditional behaviors have been slow to change until the population became more educated. Gold was originally a popular form of saving personal wealth and a hedge against inflation in many countries prior to the establishment of a reliable banking system. The safety of banks and higher returns available from other forms of investment have gradually diminished the importance of gold as a form of saving. But till today, in many Asian countries, India being in the forefront, the traditional habit of saving and paying dowry in the form of gold jewelry has continued unabated. Even after more secure and financially attractive forms of saving became widely available. In our country, we possess nearly 30,000 metric tons of gold valued $3,000 billion, an amount roughly twice the value of the public deposit held by Indian banks. Because the gold has to be imported in this form of saving removes liquidity from national economy and prevents the reinvestment of personal saving in productive activities within the country. At a time when hundreds of billions of dollars are separately needed by investment in roads, power plants, and telecommunication infrastructure, an anachronistic habit forces the country to depend upon foreign investors while we continue to sit on a huge hoard of untapped wealth. We end with another example. UNDP has calculated that $40 billion a year approximately would be sufficient to eradicate global poverty within 10 days, yet long after the end of the Cold War and at the time when there is not even a serious potential enemy in sight, world military expenditures remain $850 billion a year. The war is over, but the costly, wasteful, unproductive anachronism persists. Reflections and Action 2.5. Observe the overall economic conditions of particular community, caste, religious, tribe, etc. living in your neighborhood. Now, based on your observation, write a note on the causes of their socioeconomic well-being or deprivation in the society. 2.8. Observation about recent development experience. From the perspective of 10,000 years of history, human progress over the past 200 years has been extraordinary, and the achievement of the past 5 decades are nothing short of miraculous. In 2 centuries, social activities has increased to the extent that the global economy is now able to sustain population 12 times as large in 18,800. From a rural-based agrarian society, which less than 3% of the people lived in towns and societies, the human community has evolved into an urban-centered industrial society in which the urban populations now exceeds 40% of the total. This change has brought with it and aggravated a host of problems: overcrowding, population, crime, etc. But it has also brought political freedom, economic security, education, and modern conveniences to billions of people. What is more remarkable is that this social movement continues to expand and accelerate. The 1995 UNDP Human Development Report observes that over the past 50 years, the world has made greater progress in eradicating poverty than during the previous 500. Around the globe, life expectancy is climbing, infant mortality is declining, epidemic diseases are receding, famine is becoming extinct, and education is becoming more widespread. Since 1950, the average person capita income has trebled in spite of unprecedented population growth, and average real per capita consumption in developing countries has doubled. This achievement raises the possibility and the hope that that unprecedented level of prosperity could soon spread to all humanity. This accomplishment still leave more than 1 billion people in poverty, but there is growing evidence to suggest that today's least developed countries could match and perhaps even exceed the achievement of the most advanced industrial nation within a much shorter time than it took for original achievement. Beginning in 1780, it took the United Kingdom 58 years to double output per capita. The United States did it in 47 years, beginning in 1839. Japan accomplished the feat in 24 years, beginning in 1880s, but after the Second World War, Indonesia did it in 17 years, South Korea in 11, and China in 10 years. From 1960 to 1990, real per capita standards of living based on purchasing power parity multiplied 12-fold in South Korea, 7-fold in Japan, and 6-fold in Egypt and Portugal, and well above 5-fold in Indonesia and Thailand. While the possibility of increasing the velocity and expanding the scope of development to all countries are encouraging, it is by no means clear how quickly or to what extent they will be realized, nor is there a consensus regarding the policies, strategies, and actions most conducive for that the realization. Countries and regions are distinguished by vast differences in performance that is not easily explained or eliminated. Among developing countries between 1965 to 1990, the per capita GDP rose by 5.5% annually in a high-performing East Asian countries compared to the less 2% in South Asia and 0.25% in Sub-Saharan Africa. Similarly, if one looks at the experiences in Eastern Europe since 1990, one will see that the transition strategies implemented by 25 East European countries were unable to prevent widespread economic decline and social distress. Production in all 25 countries fell significantly from a minimum of 18% in Poland to 45% in Russia, 60% in Ukraine, and 75% in Armenia. Even in East Germany, where the German government and industry have pumped in more $1.1 trillion since reunification, the expected results have not been achieved. Unemployment in Eastern Germany has grown from very low levels to more than 25%, while productivity remains at 1/5, the well prevalent in the western part of the country. So there are many questions regarding the strategy and widespread disparities in performance all over the world. The experience of the past 2 centuries has given rise to at least 5 major categories of development theory. Applying these theories to explain the development of 23 countries during the period of 1515 and 1940, Morris and Edelman found that each major theory adequately explained the experience of a range of countries and periods, but none of these theories applies universally to the 19th century experience of all countries. This finding suggests the need for a more comprehensive approach. Realization of this need has prompted the then Secretary General of the United Nations, Boutros Ghali, to call for thoughtful reflections on development as the most important intellectual challenge of the coming years. Reflections and Action 2.6. Look into the latest Human Development Report UN or Human Development Report of any of the states of India. Based on your reading, develop a chart showing the changes that has been taken place in various indicators of human development in our country or in a state in recent years. 2.9 Conclusion. Development today is not merely an economic phenomenon. It encompasses more than a financial side of people's lives. Development should be perceived as a multi-dimensional process involving the recognition and reorientation of entire economic and social system. In addition to improvement in institutional, social and administrative structures, as well as in popular attitudes and in many cases even customs and beliefs. To conclude, development must be conceived as a multi-dimensional process involving major changes in social structure, popular attitudes and national institution, as well as the acceleration of economic growth, the reduction of inequality and the eradication of absolute poverty. Development is a process. This process has been taking place in society since time immemorial, but it has acquired greater intensity and velocity during the past 5 years and has accelerated rapidly over the past 5 decades. In the broad terms applicable to all societies and historical period, development can be defined as an upward directional movement or societies from lesser to the greater levels of energy, efficiency and quality, productivity, complexity, comprehension, creativity, mastery, enjoyment and accomplishment. To highlight all these issues we have discussed in this unit, the concepts and perspectives of change and modernization, criticism of the perspective of modernization, scope, conditions and barriers of development. We have also presented a few developmental experiences in this unit. 210 Further reading. The SIAR 1971 Essay of Modernization of Underdeveloped Societies, Volume 1, and S.C. Dubey, Modernization and Development. So this is the end of the unit 2 from Sociology of Development. Thank you.